There we are, it's officially in progress. As I say, the session is being recorded, and as a consequence, you might like to leave your camera switched off. We currently have all microphones muted on entry, but towards the end of the talk, we may be able to open microphones and allow people to ask questions. But if anybody wishes to type a question into the chat box, I will do my best to make a note of these and make sure that Frank is able to answer them at the end. The session won't be locked because the last time we ran a session, we found that some people were ejected by poor internet connections. And because the session was locked, they had difficulty reconnecting. But because I'm monitoring the waiting room, we shouldn't have any problems there. So if you are unlucky enough to lose your connection, simply reconnect using the link. I will see that in the waiting room and I should be able to admit you very, very easily. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Frank McElhinney. Frank is a fine art photographer whose work deals with contemporary issues such as migration, conflict, and national identity, and usually through the lens of history. He is interested in history as a process and the ways in which history is used as a material. Frank graduated from the Fine Art Photography course at Glasgow School of Art in 2014, and in the same year won the prestigious Jill Todd Award. Frank was one of the degree show artists, actually, who was affected by the fire at Glasgow School of Art. Experimenting with a range of techniques, Frank has produced solar graph images using 200 pinhole cameras in 45 Scottish locations, and Only for Freedom is a series of photographs made in each of Scotland's 32 council areas. And it stands, as Frank has written, as a declaration of independence written by light. Frank has also used aerial landscape photography taken from kites as a response to the crisis of people precariously crossing the Mediterranean. Awarded the street level and the Art Link residency in 2019, Frank spent time in Donegal, where he focused on a long-term project on migration, and in particular the failure of the potato crop and its impact on Ireland and Scotland. He writes of this as the greatest human tragedy suffered by any European country during the 19th century. The work produced there will finally be exhibited and is opening on the 9th of October in the Regional Culture Centre in Letterkenny, and Frank is going to tell us a bit more about this later on. Frank engages intellectually both with the process of photography and with the projects he develops. His depth of knowledge on the history and philosophy of photographic practices, which he brings to bear in his own work, suggests that we're in for a very interesting and stimulating presentation. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Frank to Flow Photofest. Over to you, Frank.
Thanks very much. Let me just share my screen, guys. Okay, first thing to say is thanks for the introduction, Matt. But thank you also to everyone for attending tonight. I mean, there's a lot of these talks that are on now, so having you all turn up tonight to listen is much appreciated. And the best part about these for me is the kind of feedback or the dialogue. So I hope that people have got questions and either put them in the chat or at the end of the talk when there's time. Hopefully we can just open things up and you can come on and speak and ask questions or pass comment. So the talk tonight is, I guess it's in two parts really. The first part is me really talking about ideas around photography. And the second part is me looking more at work that I've made myself that speaks in a way to the theme of Flowfest this year, Flow Photofest this year, which is legacy. So this is really the agenda, if you will, of how I'm going to present. I'm going to talk through, well, I hope there's probably quite a lot of people on the call right now who are themselves photographers, or if not active photographers, are interested obviously in photography. You probably ask yourself some of the same questions as I do, but this is my opportunity to hold forth a little bit on some of the ones that I think are important and see if you agree or have other perspectives on it. Secondly, I'm going to talk about something that's kind of dear to my heart. You know, when I was a young man, I studied history at university. Photography came much later. I went to university when I was 18. I went to art school when I was 46. Okay, just a bit of my own background. But as Matt alluded to in the introduction there, quite often the way that I work with photography, I'm considering history and the role that photography can play sometimes in shining a light on histories that are maybe either distorted or forgotten. But I'll elaborate on that when we get there. Thirdly, I'm going to talk about some artists who work with photography that I would look upon as good examples to look up to, projects that they've done that I think in some way address the problem of history and the kind of what I'll call the wreckage of the past. Then once I've gotten through all that section, which is really about the ideas around photography, I'm just going to dive into showing you images that I've made that is, first of all, a past project called Adrift, but then secondly, a project I'm working on right now, which will have its first showing in Donegal in October. So next month, I'm actually going out on Thursday of next week to Ireland to install the work. So let me press on. Okay, as I say, you all have your own your own key questions that you ask, I'm sure, about photography, but these are mine, my top three at the moment. If you ask me tomorrow, they might change. So there's a philosophical question: what is photography in the first place? I mean, I don't know how many photographers actually worry about that. It's just something that, you know, you kind of have an unconscious competence around photography now. Digital photography can sometimes make it so easy that we don't question the nature of the medium itself. But you know, when I was doing that first degree when I was 18, I also studied philosophy, and it does make me always kind of look at things in a kind of fundamental way. And the important thing for me is the distinction between what I'll call an understanding of photography as this automatic thing that happens at the click of a button, which is quite a common, I would say, misunderstanding of what photography is, versus my way of looking at it, and that is as a multi-stage process where somewhere in all the steps of the process, there is a light event where light registers on a light sensitive surface, whether that be a chemical material or a chemical reaction or an electrochemical response that happens in digital photography, that must be present at some point in the process in order for it to be photography. But upstream or downstream of that, there are potentially many different stages in the photographic process that involves human intervention. It's quite possible that none of those steps are automatic, in my opinion. The light event is a natural occurrence, but it's not necessarily automatic. It doesn't necessarily replace a human action, you know, some kind of labor that's being saved. Okay, I could elaborate on that, but I'm kind of conscious of time, and I'll walk through these and hope that people have questions later on. So another question I always ask myself is, you know, what are my photographs about principally? Like, I think the question that, or a statement that's used quite a lot in photography is the most difficult thing in photography is deciding what to point the camera at. But I'm not so sure. I think that what I point the camera at is what I'll call subject matter. It's the thing that I happen to be photographing or making the photograph of, but it's not necessarily what the photograph or group of photographs is about. So there's a subtle distinction there. So I think it's really important to figure out what your subject is, even before you think about what your subject matter is. Maybe I'm not expressing that very well. But essentially, you know, these are two things that are happening at the same time. I'm not saying it's one precedes the other. But I guess the key point is I'm always mindful of what the photographs are about. What is the subject, rather than simply what is it I'm pointing the camera at. So, and then thirdly, in some ways, most importantly, I suppose, you know, why do I make photographs? I mean, the truth is that, you know, there's lots of different reasons why I would make photographs, and some of them are as, you know, mundane as I'm on holiday in Barra last week and I'll make snaps as memories, like casual photographs that anyone would do for their scrapbook of memories. But when I'm making projects, when I'm thinking critically about photography as art practice, the two things I think that I'm doing, and again, these can be happening at the same time, is one, I photograph to figure things out. So if there's something that bothers me or I'm really interested in but don't fully understand, then making photographic work is a way of really trying to bottom out and increase my knowledge and understanding of something. So an example might be something as simple as, well, it's maybe not that simple. It's a big topic, but Scotland as a nation. Okay, you know, I'm an older chap, 57. I've travelled throughout Scotland many times, and one observation would be that no matter what region of Scotland or part of Scotland you're in, there's a different perception of what Scotland as a nation is or might become. So when we have questions on the agenda right now, such as should we be independent, you know, that's still a live, obviously very live topic, then it makes me curious about the way we all perceive Scotland as a nation, because there are so many different ways of getting your head around that. And I'm using photography on another project that I'm not going to talk about to try and reach an understanding of our conception of Scotland as a nation. And then there's another point, which is resistance. So I'm one of these people who probably looks at the world and thinks that there's a lot of problems in the world. You know, climate change is an obvious one at the moment. You've got COP26 happening in Glasgow soon, but you know, there's conflict around the world. There's migration happening, forced migration, all kinds of big issues that I think that culture and art have some role in working against. So I'll talk more about that when we go through to the next slide. Oh. Okay, so moving on to that in a sense, what I want to talk about is history and photography. I'm going to talk about a guy named Walter Benjamin, who some of you may have heard of because he wrote a seminal work or essay called Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, which is kind of a second version of something that he wrote called A Short History of Photography. I better not go into that because that'll take up too much time. But fundamentally, he's talking about how the nature of art changes from in times when religion was really important and artworks had some kind of ritual significance. They had what he called this aura about them. When you make things reproducible through mechanical means, and then, you know, step it up 5 gears when you get photography on the scene, that kind of undermines at least the aura that previously existed for art. But we'll put that to one side, because what I really want to talk about is the final essay that he completed was a short little work named The Thesis or Theses on the Philosophy of History. And in that work, I'm going to use this image that's on the screen to try and talk about those ideas in a simple way, so that we can relate it to photographic practice. So this image is Angelus Novus by Paul Klee. He was the artist, but Walter Benjamin picks this out, and he writes about this as being the angel of history, and this is what he refers to in the thesis on the philosophy of history. And the way he reads this image is, this is an angel. To me, it looks almost like an anthropomorphic bird, but you know, it is an angel. The way that Benjamin reads it is that this angel has got its arms in the air, its wings rather, in the air, because it's being blown backwards, okay? And it's being blown backwards by what he calls the storm from paradise. And that storm is coming from the past. Okay, so if you can imagine looking at this angel, what's beyond the angel, over its shoulders, is the future. The angel is being blown backwards into the future. So what do we call this storm from paradise? Well, it's progress. Okay, so if you think about the long march of human history, what the angel sees as it looks back into the past is a pile of wreckage that is growing higher and higher into the sky. So, you know, if you just think of this time that Benjamin lived in, you know, he published this essay in 1940. He was a German Jew who was effectively on the run because of the Nazis, and he was in exile in France. He eventually committed suicide, in fact, on the border with Spain as he tried to get out. So you see, as his perception of history was, you're looking back at a world war where millions of people died. You're looking at a time when there had been huge optimism about socialist movements for social justice and change that had by this point in time completely failed. You had the Russian Revolution had gone from something that potentially was going to bring about equality to a very bureaucratic totalitarian society. And of course, in Germany, you had the rise of Nazism. So the angel looks back at a whole load of oppression and injustice, and that analogy still works today, I would suggest. You know, I think of things in the very recent past, like Brexit or wars in various places like Afghanistan, and you know, the wreckage of the past, that piling up process goes on and on. Now, what Benjamin alludes to in this essay is that culture, the role of the artist, or you know, anyone who's conscious of history, would be like this angel. You'd like to almost pause history and somehow repair some of the wreckage that you see in front of you. Maybe that involves finding some of the untold stories that need to be brought into the light. Maybe that involves counter arguments against narratives of the ruling class or those in power that come to the fore and dominate. Okay, at the moment we hear phrases like build back better after COVID. Not so long ago, the mantra was get Brexit done. Yeah, that's all about a view of progress, and it's almost as though if you're not with the message of progress, then you're the problem and you're to be pushed out of the way, or as we see on the screen, blown back into the future in this storm. Okay, so that all is a bit perhaps high level philosophical, but what I'll try and do to make it more concrete is give you examples of artists, photographers that I'm interested in. I could give you loads more, but I'm going to give you these 4 artists that I'm aware of who have done projects that in a way repair the wreckage of the past, or at least attempt to. And it's important to realise that my belief is that no one person, no one artist, no one photographer is going to change the world in any massive way, but the accumulation of people participating in what I've called earlier resistance, participating in some attempts to repair the wreckage of the past and connect that to the problems of the present, well, that can have an impact in a positive, progressive way. And I don't want to lose that point of, I'm not someone who's backward looking, and I'm not suggesting it's all about trying to pluck stories from history. Everything that I do, everything that these guys do is an attempt to connect to the contemporary issues that we face. So Ariella Azari, first on the list, is an Israeli woman who is a political theorist and a photographer. She did a big project called The Natural History of Rape, which is an allusion to another essay that was written by a guy called W.G. Sebald, who wrote The Natural History of Destruction, about the Allied bombing of German cities and towns. This project is about the fact that one of the most unreported war crimes, I suppose, of the Second World War is at the end of the war, when Allied soldiers invaded Germany, up to 2 million German women were raped. Not something that you hear referred to much, but historians have documented it, and it's one of the, as I say, probably one of the worst war crimes that happened in quite a short space of time. In a sort of a period of about a month around the end of the war in Europe. Now, what Ariella's grinding the axe about is that you will see when all these hundreds of thousands of soldiers came into the German cities and towns and committing these crimes, they were all many of them were carrying cameras. There is a lot of photography of the destroyed cities and towns that were made by the soldiers themselves, but there's not one photograph of rape. So her whole project is to kind of try and re-examine the archive of photographs that exist from that period in time and reinterpret them, and to actually look at photographs of destruction that were made by the soldiers in those environments, and to think of them as photographs of a crime scene where potentially rape was being committed somewhere right there and then at that time. And I really recommend that if anybody's interested in the subject, she's You can download the PDF that she's written called The Natural History of Rape. And, you know, she eloquently argues the case for how you can use archival photographs, read them in a different way, and recover some suppressed history, and try and use that to challenge ideas today. So the next one on the list is a Frenchman called Eric Manigaud. I'm going to go into the internet now and show you. Hopefully this will show up okay. Let me go here. I hope you can see that on the screen.
Not yet.
That's okay. I'll share again. Sorry, I just have to share again. Where's my Safari screen? Hold on. Okay. You should see it now.
Yes, indeed, got that.
Okay. So this, back to my proposition earlier that photography itself is a multi-stage process where only one of those steps is the actual light event. Okay. What you're looking at on the screen right now is, this is the gallery of the artist Eric Manigaud, and all these little thumbnails. If I click on one and blow that up, okay, so actually what that is a drawing that he has made on a large scale. You know, it could be 4 foot by 5 foot, that sort of order of magnitude, where he's taken an archival photograph and projected it onto a piece of paper and used graphite and graphite powder to then create this vast enlargement of this really small archival photograph. So it becomes quite grainy and blurred. Now, what Manigaud has done here is he's focused on a particular event, which was in October 1961, where a large number of Algerians in Paris joined protests in support of the Algerian revolutionaries who were rising up in Algeria against the French colonialism. They rounded these guys up and many of them were murdered. Yeah, the claims are that up to 200 of these protesters in Paris were actually killed in this October event, 1961. At the time, the photographs were suppressed. So, as with Britain, when anything sensitive happens, quite often censorship's in place. And after a period of time, 40 or 50 years, those images can then come out of the archive. Now, Manigaud has made a decision that, okay, they've come out of the archive, but nobody's really seen them. The people in power who control the narrative, they've achieved what they would like, and that is that this really horrible event that happened has been forgotten about. And so he said, okay, well, how can I work with these photographic images in a way that I can shine a light on those events and maybe speak about some of the issues that are present today around maybe migration, different things that are happening within France today. And this is what he's done. Now, the tricky bit is I would say that there's a possibility you could even consider these as photographs. The drawings themselves could be viewed as photographs still, but that's a separate debate. The important thing is that the artist is using photography in a way that's recovering events that were suppressed, and in the Benjaminian sense, trying to repair the wreckage of the past, do some of that work. Another artist is Paul C Wright, who is an Irishman, grew up in Ulster during the Troubles, and he did a series called Sectarian Murder, and he went to places where sectarian murders had occurred, and they were quite mundane places, but the way the photographs are made gives some kind of eerie sense of something might have happened there that's unpleasant. And an important part of his work is the way that he captions things. So if you look at, I'll read the text in case the small print is unreadable. You'll see a motorbike going across there in this image. So the text at the bottom says, Thursday, the 14th of December, 1972. The 16-year-old youth was standing at the corner of Dandy Street talking when a motorcycle with 2 youths on it drove by. The pillion passenger was carrying a Sterling submachine gun and opened fire on the group. The boy fell dying in a hail of bullets. So what looks like a quite mundane scene, although maybe a little bit uncanny, the whole meaning of it is changed, shifted when you read that caption. And this is a whole series that C Wright made of these kind of scenes, and the text is always written that way, just very factual, and importantly, never ever saying whether it was a Catholic or a Protestant that was the victim or who the assailants were. It's just meant to be, I would think, this open-ended statement on the senselessness of some of these killings, which involved victims that were just basically often innocent bystanders, very young age, in this case 16. So it's about, the way I read it is it's about the senselessness of violence against civilians within these conflicts. And I guess, you know, one of the interesting things for me about this is C Wright has lived through these times, so this is a very recent history for him. You know, he can almost reach out and touch it. I've heard him give talks, you know, and you know, one thing that stuck in my mind was he was talking about one time he got into trouble for walking along a particular road on his way home from school, because obviously his school uniform would give away what religion he was, and that's the sort of climate and environment in which he grew up. Okay, and then lastly, we have Chloe Dew Matthews. Now, some of you might have seen this work because it was in I think it was in stills in an exhibition 5 or 6 years ago, because it was the anniversary of the First World War. And what Chloe Dew Matthews did is she did research around young guys who'd been executed for cowardice and desertion during World War I. Now, I can't remember the numbers, but there were hundreds of these executions. It was quite a common thing that happened. Now, you can imagine in today's environment where people understand things about post-traumatic stress and mental illness, that you would think that if soldiers in the front line were affected in certain ways, that it would be recognised and dealt with a lot differently than it was at that time. But, you know, unfortunately, these guys, most of whom were really young, you know, like, you know, most of them in their 20s, lost their lives. And the way that it happened is they would be shot at dawn in these quite mundane, but sometimes actually beautiful landscapes in France, mainly. So, as I say, Chloe Dew Matthews made this series of these rather poignant images. Just flick through a few. So there could be just these very ordinary scenes where people were shot at dawn. And, you know, it's difficult just seeing it on a screen and reading it the weight of these images from a screen like this, but in an exhibition environment where you are surrounded by them and you understand where she gives information on who the person was, when they were, how old they were, when they were shot, where they were, gives more details. It kind of brings this passage in history back to life, or it did for me anyway. So just to recap, that's the first part of the talk, ideas about photography and what it can do. I'm now going to drop into my own work, but that kind of sums up in a way how I see the usefulness of photography, or the potential that it has to work with history, through history, to address contemporary issues. Because when I think about history, I don't just think about the facts of what happened in the past. I think about how history has been used, usually as a tool in the hands of people who are in power to legitimize their own position of authority. I think about how certain histories are sidelined, forgotten, or even suppressed because they tell inconvenient truths that might challenge the way things currently are in our society. And I think that artists, photographers can have an active role to play in our culture and society by, if you like, refusing to forget, by tackling some of these difficult histories head on. Okay, so that's my spiel about my ideas on photography, and hopefully some of you will shoot me down in flames later on. I'm going to drop in now to, I'm going to share again just to give you this next part. Oh, oops. Can you still hear me?
Yes, can hear you fine.
Yeah,
Yep,
okay.
just seeing the main screen though.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get my screen. Okay, I'm going to try this again. Sorry about this. I'm having problems sharing the screen. I want to share something different and it's not letting me switch over. The only thing I can suggest, Matt, is you disable my sharing and then re-enable my sharing, if you could do that.
Yes, okay, just give me a second or two.
Try that.
Okay, I've just removed the host permissions, and I'm just going to reinstate them now.
Okay.
That should be you now reinstated as a host, so you should be able to use the share facility.
No, it's not letting me do it.
I could try sharing my welcome
Wait a
screen.
minute. Okay, I think I've got it. Hold on.
Excellent. Yes, you have. Wonderful.
Sorry about that.
Well done.
Completely my fault. Okay, sorry guys. Right, what I'm going to do is just let these run in a slideshow. What you're going to be looking at is a set of 30 images here that will just spool through, and they're all images made using kites and drones, aerial photographs of abandoned settlements in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland. Okay, I visited, I think it was 13 islands. All of them were Western Isles rather than the Northern Isles, just time and money. Although there was one Northern Isle, Stroma, which is a little island off the top of Caithness before you get to Orkney. So how this project began for me was in 2015 when I was looking at the news coverage of people crossing the Mediterranean. Then I was kind of motivated to do some of what I was talking about before, make a project that tackled this contemporary issue, but did it in a way that I could work with, in a sense, history. The immediate response of, I guess, some photographers would be, you have to go, you have to document what's happening in some of these really stressful situations in Calais or on the islands like Lesbos where many refugees were arriving. I thought about, well, maybe one of the ways that as this kind of old white guy in Scotland, maybe one of the ways that I can address this issue is by taking a look at a time when people in Scotland themselves were, for various reasons, forced into migration. So that goes back to the clearances and then later on the potato blight in Scotland. I thought if I can go around the Highlands and Islands, places like Caithness and Sutherland and Ardnamurchan, as well as all these islands, and photograph places that were abandoned through little choice on the part of the people that lived there, that kind of builds a narrative about our own history that relates to what's happening in the world at large and this contemporary crisis as it was billed at the time of people crossing the Mediterranean. Make us think in a more empathetic way about the plight of these people who are currently affected by it. Make people more receptive, I guess, of those that are seeking sanctuary in countries like Scotland now. So that's what I did. Travelled around these places, flew my kite, sometimes flew the drone when there was no wind. One of the things that I found along the way is that, it's not just a 19th century thing. These abandoned settlements in Scotland, that place I mentioned on Stroma, I was just going around Caithness and got talking to someone about this seemingly deserted island, Stroma, where it's not far from Dounreay, which is a big nuclear power station that was on the coastline up there. And the story was that in the 1950s, when they were building the power station, some of the people from the area, including those that lived on that island, were attracted by the prospect of work on building the power station, and then later on, I guess, working in the power station itself. And that put a drain on the rural community that were, I guess, in quite a tough life, eking out a living through farming. And eventually the numbers on the island dwindled to a low point in the early 60s and people just left. And that's Stroma right there on the screen now as it happens. So a kind of modern day settlement, relatively speaking, that's now abandoned. So it's a process that continues through time for various reasons. So that's let me just go to a different. So that was one project, and I want to show you another one, which is the project I'm working on now, and then I'll shut up. You'll be pleased to hear, and you can ask questions. So while I was doing that project, I got to thinking, okay, so here I am, I'm making this project about forced migration out of Scotland, all these abandoned settlements. There are many. I've probably visited certainly over 100 through over the course of a couple of years. I got to thinking, my name's McElhinney. All my grandparents are Irish. You know, we've got the McElhinneys, the Durkins, the Brannans, the Gallaghers, and it just goes on through the generations. And I think Matt mentioned it in the introduction. I managed to get a residency exchange through street level, where I went to Donegal for a month, and that was the place that my family came from. So my great grandparents were born during the famine in County Donegal, got married, I think, in 1871, and then came to Glasgow, and that's the start of the family in Scotland. So that kind of stimulated me to think about, okay, legacy, you know, how this story all unravels. And I started investigating the migration of people from Ireland to Scotland. You know, the statistics are pretty crazy. I think in the west of Scotland, anywhere between a fifth and a third of people have got Irish heritage, you know, from fairly recent, you know, from the last 2-3 generations. So it's had a massive impact, certainly in the west of Scotland, and I'm sure in other parts of the country as well. So I went to Ireland. What you're looking at, yeah, I was lucky. I discovered that one of my second cousins was right into genealogy, and he'd done all this research, and he traced right back to the farm in Donegal where our ancestors had been tenant farmers in the 19th century. And I went back. There's this lovely big green field with the cows in it, which I guess once upon a time would have been all, you know, run rigs, potatoes. Lovely big house, but next to the big house, there's this dilapidated farmhouse, all tumbled down and cracked and broken. And this is one photograph I made there. This is the ancestral home, if you will, and that crack down the stonework kind of had, I guess, a symbolic value for me. Not much of a picture, but when you understand the story behind it, you can probably guess why I took the picture. So this, let me just spin through these photographs, tell you what they are, and then talk about, I guess, how the project sits in my mind and this idea of legacy. So this is, some of these photographs are of Donegal. This is Sleeve League, kind of place with quite impressive cliffs. This is a place called Malin Head, which is the northernmost point of Ireland, of the whole of the island of Ireland, which confusingly is part of what people would call Southern Ireland, because Donegal actually carves around over the top, even although it's one of the 26 counties in the Republic. This is Tory Island, which is a small island off the coast of Donegal, where everybody speaks Gaelic. While I was there, this is kind of like a film strip. While I was there, this thing happened where I was going to a big lake. It's called Inch Levels, where thousands of these whooper swans were there. It was November, so winter, and during winter time, all these swans and geese come from Iceland, but it was really impressive, the fact that, you know, I'd never seen that many swans in the one place. And the fact that they were from Iceland became kind of emblematic for me, because I was thinking a lot about migration, and these swans migrate every year over to Donegal. And I would stand there, and they kind of roost in this huge lake, Inch, it's called. Then every morning when the sun comes up, they all get up and fly out to the fields so that they can feed. And then when the sun goes down, they all fly back in again. So I'd be standing there, I got obsessed, and I'd be standing there at dusk and dawn in really bad light, photographing these swans leaving the lake and then coming back in. And I'd have this high ISO film making really bad exposures, which I'm sure you look at this is like a contact print of a kind of film strip of six images. So you can see how bad the quality is, but I don't know, it kind of captures a feeling of what it was like standing there with these groups of swans all arriving en masse at that time in that bad light. So leaving Ireland, some of you may recognise this rock, volcanic outcrop in the middle of the Firth of Clyde. Its official name is Ailsa Craig. Its unofficial name is Paddy's Milestone. Now you'll notice that when you view the rock from this angle, it's quite curved on top. When you view it from a different angle, it can be quite pointed. It's a strange rock formation, which viewed from any angle looks completely different. So again, mini obsession. This is the navigation point for all sea traffic coming between Ireland and Scotland. And I just imagined all over the generations, all these different Irish people, and indeed Scottish people go back the other way, but mainly Irish people coming to Scotland, seeing this landmark and having this hope of, okay, this is the crossing point. It's called Paddy's Milestone because it's roughly halfway between Belfast and Glasgow. So when you pass that milestone, you're closer to Scotland and a new home than you are to the past that you've left behind. So I then would drive around the coastline to points in Dumfries or the Isle of Arran or Ayrshire, all these different places where you could view it using a long lens and see it in a different way. And then eventually I bit the bullet, and I got a trip out in a wee fishing boat from Girvan with my sons, and we went on to the Ailsa Craig, Paddy's Milestone, and the final luxury was I took a Waverley excursion, you know, the paddle steamer. I found out it actually does a circuit round the milestone, and that was probably the best in a way, because when I went on a little boat, it just headed straight for the place, and you know, from a photographic standpoint, there wasn't enough distance to really get perspective. Although it was a great trip to make, to stand on the thing and walk around and investigate. But I'd recommend the Waverley trip to anyone that has an interest. It's a really great way to see the thing. So then you're in. I wanted to make trips back to Ireland, but I couldn't because of COVID. So then connecting everything back again, I started thinking, okay, I'm in Scotland. Scotland was affected by the same potato blight that affected Ireland. It's just that you didn't have mass death, but you did have quite significant migration. I've read that probably 200,000 people in the Highlands and Islands were affected by the potato blight in the middle of the 19th century. And up to a third of those people left, they migrated. And many of them would have come to the city of Glasgow and other urban centres within Scotland and England. Things that I photographed included shells, because in the accounts of how people survived, when the potato crops failed. There was a lot of people in coastal areas would eat shellfish. You know, and I've just come back from Barra, where, you know, there's some quite well documented accounts of people indeed only being able to survive through eating shellfish and seaweed and so on. And that was one of the places in Scotland that was really badly affected. The landlord there was not very supportive, shall we say. And then I photographed a series of what are called relief works. This is a road called Destitution Road up near Ullapool. This is a wall called the Famine Wall that goes up over a hill, Ben Jerick, I think is the way you pronounce it. Although it's spelled differently, it's spelled with a D, D-E-A-R-G, I think. But just to give an idea, it took me, you know, I'm not the fastest anymore, but it took me about 3 hours to get to this point where this photograph is made. And as you can see, I'm photographing from the bottom of the wall up right over the summit of the hill. So if you can imagine that people who were half starved in the Highlands, their crops had failed, they needed money to buy food, bread, just to survive. They had to go and work 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week, building these pointless walls and sometimes roads and so on, in exchange for just enough to survive during the famine years. And indeed, you know, many of them left to go to the urban centres, as I've said. That's the wall close up, and back to another wall in Ireland, kind of closing the circle. So I'll leave it there, but I think you get the idea of the way I'm working is quite circuitous, you know, but travelling, going to places that have been affected by these difficult histories, gathering in different images that I can somehow connect, sometimes stumbling upon things like the swans, that was kind of completely unplanned, stumbling upon things that have some kind of symbolic value and connected to the themes that I'm exploring. And all of this tells a story that builds on the previous project, Adrift, about the legacy of migration, both in Scotland and Ireland. And also, I hope you'll agree, connects back to my ideas about photography and history and how using photography, you can shine a light on things that are in some way not spoken about enough. I read a quote, and I'll finish with this. I read a thing that there's a woman called Rebecca Solnit, who she's quite well known, I think, as a feminist writer, but she writes fantastic kind of travel books. She wrote a book called, I think it's called The Book of Migrations, which is about her own visits back to Ireland because she's got Irish heritage, and she was talking to people about the famine and stories around that. And she says, trauma is inherited as silence, a silence that may take generations to learn to hear. So I'll say that again. Trauma is inherited as silence, a silence that may take generations to learn to hear. And I think that's quite true. I think that when things so traumatic happen that it takes away a big percentage of the population, either through actual death or through migration, it can really scar the kind of psychology of the people that are left behind, almost to the point where they just don't want to talk about it or face it, and it gets buried. But, you know, part of the process of recovery and being able to cope with the current day problems is that we kind of should address some of those those difficult histories, things that have happened in the past, and through my work, that's what I hope to try and do. Okay, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you very much. The Famine Wall image reminds me of when I first came to the Highlands. I was told that in the 1970s and early 80s, the job creation schemes were rebuilding the dry stone walls that were originally built as job creation schemes. You know, which that kind of whole history repeating itself thing was really very, very, very prominent, very obvious. What I thought we could do now is we can open all mics, and if anybody wishes to ask any questions, feel free to go for it. I'll also be looking at the chat box if anybody doesn't wish to speak but wishes to formulate a question in that sense. The only thing I'm trying to do now is work out how to do that, how to allow everybody to speak. Just give me a wee second. There we are. Everybody should now have the ability to unmute themselves and ask a question. But Morag Cross has asked, are the kite photographs of deserted settlements going to be published? They're beautiful. So there we are, Frank.
Well, yeah, thanks for that. I have no plans to publish them at the moment, but I think at some point in the future, I'd love to make a publication about this whole theme of migration. And so at that point in time, some of those images would find their way into that. But it's kind of, you know, I started by making that series, but then obviously, as you can see, I've developed that on to in different directions. So the overarching theme of migration between Scotland and Ireland, I think has to come together at some point in a publication. I should say also that the hope is that, or the likelihood is that the work that I'm developing, it's going to be shown in Ireland next month, but hopefully in the summer next year, it'll also make its way to street level in Glasgow. So there'll be an opportunity to see some of it there as well.
Hi, Frank. Steve Elliott here.
Hi there.
Thanks ever so much. That was absolutely brilliant. Really enjoyed that. I'm currently studying for MA photography at Falmouth, but I'm actually I'm an exile on Main Street in the Kip.
Wow. Yeah, you know it well.
And so it's really, really interesting what you've been saying about that, trying to, you know, connecting sort of, badly written histories to contemporary issues, and that is something I'm sort of struggling with a little bit, because as I'm moving through the modules, as it were, and it's something, you know, it was something it's quite a similar experience to what you've had. But I thought, right, I live here, I've been here 10 years, trying to deal with all those big issues, ecocide, you know, forced migration, all those other things. And so I started to look locally, and of course in Inverkip there was an issue of the witches in Inverkip who were burned, and so I sort of dealt with that in a kind of a creative way, and sort of it helped me get through one module. And then suddenly it all came to life that there's a woman out there now, a QC, who's now currently trying to you know, get a pardon for all the burnings and all the rest of it, and it's all happening sort of now. So that kind of folding of history rather than the linearity is quite an amazing thing. And I'm thinking about all those things, and you've just described it in the most perfect way. So I really, really enjoyed it. I wouldn't mind getting in touch with you, talk some more.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Thanks.
Well, I know Inverkip well. I used to work at Spango Valley in Greenock when it was a factory that made stuff.
Oh, IBM, yeah.
Good.
Rebecca Marr has asked about your choice of black and white, Frank.
Yeah. I find that, well, there's two things really. One is that for me, it's a simplifying thing. It's in the sense it's an abstraction in that set. You know, one meaning of abstraction is to abstract away from something and simplify it. When you make things in black and white, it kind of concentrates the mind on maybe the facts is a bad way of putting it, but it concentrates the mind on the bare bones of what's in that image. and there's less of a distraction through colour and the seductive beauty of colour, let's say, yeah. So that's one thing, is just simplifying down and focusing the mind on the content of the picture. But the second thing for me is, and this is maybe a very weak thing to say, but it's easier to homogenize your different photographs. Okay, so I'm not someone who's trying to make single iconic images beautiful, stand out. That one is the killer image. I'm someone who's trying to make jigsaw pieces that will fit together and build meaning. And so by working in black and white, I feel that I can get more, or I just feel instinctively that it can become more coherent more easily as I put those jigsaw pieces together if it's in black and white.
Rebecca says, thank you, that makes sense. One of the reasons for reading out chat messages is they don't show up in the recording. So sometimes people won't understand your reply because the context is not there. Right. So I'm not just simply being a parrot here, my apologies.
And I just saw the question about the kites and the kite photos, and some of this, and the Morag was saying they're looking at them partly as an archaeologist, yeah. And that makes sense to me. I mean, you know, in a way, all of that, you can read the landscape, all of it, as a source, an archaeological source. It's all there, the layers of it. I mean, we typically think of archaeology as what precedes history, written history, but material culture is still a source of evidence to me, that even if it's quite recent. So I view it that way also.
Yes, Morag had made an earlier comment on Daniel Wilson very early on in the session, on Daniel Wilson writing in 1850 on prehistory. Yeah, right, okay. on prehistory. Okay. And Morag was also involved in the Glasgow World War I website on yes, on executions, believe it or not. So it's a lot of knowledge and information there. Thank you, Morag. The serendipitous moment seems to be something you take advantage of. Is that something that you deliberately, I suppose, wait to see if something is going to happen, or is it really in the accidental moment? So the swans, for example, you know, the swans. And so
I think it's a combination. I think that I've used the term in the past of purposeful wandering, right? So, you know, driving up to Ullapool or somewhere like that, I know, because I've read and researched, that there's a destitution road, there's a wall and a hill that's one of the famine walls. I go with those, I'll have a few key destinations in mind that I know I'm going to photograph, but whether I make those journeys, it's just been completely open to happenstance, other things that happen along the way, other things you notice while you're in that environment. And I'll be led by that. I won't, you know, I'm not tunnel vision. I've not got my list. I go and photograph those things and I leave. I photograph those things and a whole lot of other stuff happens.
And are you a photographer who works from a manifesto that's clear in your head, or is it another process that you engage with? Because of your history background, I'm interested in that.
I wouldn't never say I had a manifesto, but I think that you know, what you hear me speaking about at the beginning of this talk, and the angel of history and all those ideas, those are things that I've worked out probably over the last 5-6 years since I graduated from art school. So those ideas are central to my thinking, and you know, I think through time they'll elaborate more, and I would like to write something as well about that, to kind of put it in a more coherent form. I think it's good to write down in essays your ideas about your practice. So that'll come in the future.
Because you do have a blog, is that correct?
Yeah, I've got a couple. I used to write reviews, and I did a kind of blog writing about Scottish photography, but I have a personal blog as well where I talk more about my projects. But I think I want to kind of, as I say, write some formal articles that, you know, that are well researched and you know, probably more academically correct.
We have a question coming in from Rebecca O'Doherty, who says, in terms of reading the landscape, they are like drawings. Are you ever tempted to use mark making as part of the photographic process? And I've actually written down in my own notes that your abandoned places was like marks on a page. So yeah. I kind of resonate with Rebecca's idea there.
It's a good question. And yes, the answer is yes. I think, and I haven't shown any of them tonight, but I make a lot of abstract photographs using pinhole cameras or different lensless cameras that just make marks on paper, black and white photographic paper. So, and I've done drawing in the past. So, and you saw, you know, one of my examples there tonight of an artist who I find quite inspiring is that French guy, Eric Manigaud, who that's what he does. He projects archival photographs onto large sheets of paper. He works away in graphite and graphite powder. There's other examples that I could give of that. So I'm interested in that, in drawing, and you know, I've always done it casually, but I'd like to do more of it.
But in the landscape itself, you don't make any changes to the stones you find or the objects. So you're photographing them as they are, rather than engaging in making something.
Yeah, no, it's true. The world as it presents itself is pretty interesting. Okay, there's enough there. But I've done things where, you know, collaborations, like with a performer, randomly. There's someone I met who I was working at Ravenscraig. She was working at Ravenscraig. She does like dances and performance movement and all that. And so we work together. So it can happen that I do get involved in that, but I would think that would happen more through collaboration than me instigating it.
Sorry, I was on mute there. I don't think there's any other questions coming in. Would anybody like to open their microphone and ask anything? It's 7:45. Oh, someone's coming in.
Just me again. That was a great quote. The trauma is inherited as silence. Could you just remind me who the author was of that?
That was Rebecca Solnit. She's well known as a feminist author, but she's also a really good kind of travel writer.
Brilliant.
Is that quotation part of the inspiration for your show that's coming up?
Yeah, so I called the show, what I discovered is that the Scots Gaelic word for listen and the Irish Gaelic word for listen, they're basically the same word, isht, but they just have a little accent that goes in a different direction over the letter E. So I've used that as the title for the upcoming show, Listen. Just a riff on that. It may take generations to learn to hear. So, you know, like a lot of the work that we do, it's a call to pause for thought, to listen, to look, and not be blown back relentlessly in the storm from the past.
Well, thank you very much. I think that's nearly 10:02. And Brooke Logan is coming in saying, thank you for the fascinating talk. Hope to see your work and your thoughts as a publication, and the images resonate. So on that note, Brooke, I think you've summed it up very nicely for me. Thank you very much indeed.
Quick one.
So, yes, come in.
Where will the recording be?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
Where would we find the recording?
Well, what I'll do is I'll send the link out using Eventbrite to all people who signed up. So
Right.
everyone who signed up will get the link tomorrow. It might be in the afternoon because I've got to go and do some exhibition work in the morning myself. But it will also be on will actually be on the Flow Photofest YouTube channel. That's where it will be.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you very much, Frank. It was an engaging and entertaining talk and intellectually stimulating, as I hoped it would be. So good luck with the show, and I look forward to seeing the collaboration between you and the artist from Donegal at street level in the future. All the best.
Great. Thank you. Bye-bye now.